Can we just start?
Yeah, absolutely. Start. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining in person and on Zoom. My name is Martijn. I'm associate professor here at the School of Computing and Information Systems at the University of Melbourne. But today the focus is not on me, but on our guest, Assistant Professor Martijn van der Werf from the Utrecht University in the Netherlands.
Yep.
So Martijn did a dual PhD degree in TU Eindhoven, Technical University of Eindhoven, and Humboldt University of Berlin.
Yep.
His topic of research are process mining and formal methods. He loves all those formal investigations, analysis of patronage, formal properties of patronage, formal analysis of processes. Hello, thank you for joining. Please come in. And we are lucky to host Martijn for almost a month here in Melbourne. Unfortunately, his visit approaches to the end. On Monday, he'll go back to Europe. But nevertheless, we are very pleased to welcome him. And today he will talk about process miner. Are you sure? So he will introduce some spices and thoughts about are we doing process mining correctly? What are the alternatives? I'm actually very curious to hear.
Yes.
So Martijn, it's all yours, please.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation, for allowing me to be here. Actually, this is the first time that I'm addressing all that glitters paper from 2021 and discuss a bit of the implications. It was a COVID time presentation, so it was online and it had to be in Melbourne officially. So that I'm now for the first time talking about it in Melbourne is a nice thing. So as Artem said, normally I talk about formal stuff. And this time I'm not going to talk about formal stuff. I'm going to talk about everything else than formal stuff. And it all has to do with the title, Are You Sure? And basic question I have is, how sure are you about the results that you obtain when doing process mining? So quickly for the ones who never do any process mining, this is a model. And this is especially useful for me as a European, because this is an Australian roundabout. The rules are for the Australians to go clockwise, because in Europe you go anti-clockwise. So you need some models to describe this is how it works. And this is a model, this one I can read, this is even one I can understand. If I try to learn it from reality, then here's reality. This is another roundabout, but if you now try to learn the rules, it's way more difficult. And one of the things you might notice is that the cars are driving here the other way around. So we sometimes model something and then we think everybody understands, but reality is slightly different. And that also happens when we do information systems. So if you build information systems, we use this type of models, but it is in order to support these type of systems. And then things become a bit more cluttering and you don't know how it works. So the idea of process mining is that you record everything in an event logs or execution data or however you want to name it. And that you then use all kinds of techniques to discover a model if you don't have a model, or if you have a model, then you want to check to what extent it corresponds, or if you already have a model, you want to enrich it with all kinds of data, for example, simulations, or to understand choices, all kinds of stuff. So this is basically the global picture of process mining. We're interested in processes, so orders of executions, and then we try to explain what happens using models. And that's basically here the discovery part. So I think that my talk is more general than just process discovery. But as I only looked into process discovery, I will only focus on discovery. And I leave the conclusions or the implications of what I tell for the other two parts to you. But I'm very curious about the fourth part. So what am I going to talk about? So I stemmed from process discovery in 2008. Welcome. I delivered my own tool. So I delivered my own miner, the IOP miner. So nowadays when I come to conferences, people see my name, they say, the one of the IOP miner. That's a topic of theoretical process or theoretical computer science. So basically we have a problem, We have some kind of context, we generalize, we build an algorithm, and we show that it works within that context. And basically the whole process discovery field has been working in this area. When real logs started to appear, we moved a bit more to an empirical side. So it's applied in organizations, practical settings. Data is influenced by all kinds of systems and people. And how do you show properties of such systems? So here we know how to do it. Here we move to a different type of sciences. And basically here we move to the empirical methods. And that is basically what we're now starting to move into with process discovery or process mining in general. We're becoming an empirical sciences, and we want to draw conclusions for an organization. How well can you use it? So that's a bit of the history and the setting that I want to talk about. What does it mean to move into that empirical science? These ideas are not from me alone. So I'm very happy to have worked with Martijn on the glitters paper, which I will return later. I'm working with Jana Reese and Sander Leemans a lot on the implications of empirical research and what does it mean for us. So these ideas came to be in 2018 at the BPM conference in Sydney. So this is actually a real Australian happening. We were there and Jana and Peter Vetke presented the paper on process mining crimes. So what could go wrong if you do a process mining project? And Sandra and I were attending, and afterward we started discussing. There came a paper in between, that is the 2021 paper at the KAIS conference in Melbourne. And all that glitters is not gold paper. Actually, the people liked the ideas that were in the paper so much that we got a best paper award for it. So apparently we were doing something valuable. But what was it that was so valuable in that paper? Why is the all that glitters paper so significant? At least to me. What's happening? And well, that's what we tried to elaborate on. And well, basically, we wrote a paper on it, the four of us. And well, we submitted it on November 22. It's currently in major revision. So at least our ideas were not rejected. So why here talking about an unfinished paper? Because basically that's what I'm going to do. Well, I want to get a kind of a feeling of showing what are the implications of that glitters paper. Why is that glitters paper so significant for me? And I hope that after this talk, it will also become significant for you. Not to get citations to the paper, but to get the ideas there. So that's what I want to set. So back to process discovery. Basically, we have a system. The system generates some event log. And we just want to discover a model that describes the system well. And so basically, we want to know the system. And well, this is our abstraction of that system. And then we hope it's a good representation. So process mining is just an algorithm to construct a process model that describes the executed process well. That's it. From the same log, you can, of course, identify multiple models. And then you have a question of reliability. What's the chance that these two algorithms return a similar model? Or how similar are the models actually when returned? And well, we did this with students on some event logs. Well, this is one model we got. That's another model we got. A third model, a fourth model, a fifth model. And we can continue like this. What's the relation between all those models? How good is each model? Which model do you show? So which model describes the process best? What is best actually? So that's the big question. And what we do in process mining is we determine this best in terms of 4 dimensions: fitness, generalization, precision, and simplicity. Fitness just means, can I replay the event log? And how much of the event log can I replay on my system or on my model? Generalization means how much more could I have seen that is in the system but not in my model. Precision is, what do I have? What did I miss? And how well is my model actually? And simplicity is a weird one that just says, well, how simple is my model? Has nothing to do with event log, but it is just talking about how simple is the model. So typically, if I talk about setting the stage and quality, I typically only talk about fitness and precision. because those two are somehow explainable. For the others, I always have some kind of a problem on how to explain that. And so the goodness is determined by the pair, the input and the output. So that is not independent of the algorithm. It's not independent of the log. We just have a quality that just says, well, so much of the behavior I can replay of my input. So we define the relation between the two and goodness of the input itself. And that starts to feel a bit weird.
Do you mind if I ask questions?
No problem, go ahead.
Simplicity, can you say something a bit more about what does it mean simple?
There are different measures. So for example, the most simple one I've seen is how many gateways do you have and how many activities do you have in your model. It can be something like the McCabe complexity, like how many cycles, how many choices do you have. It's a concept at the moment and not a construct, but I'll address that a bit later in the talk more precisely. But there is indeed one of the problems. What do we mean with it? We all have an ID, but we don't have the same understanding. And the question is thus, are those good approximations? And recent papers, well, recent, say from 2017, 18, there were some papers that started to address this. So a beautiful paper about the imprecision of precision measures, a comparative study of existing quality measures for process discovery. And basically, in the first one, they set some rules on precision, saying if you want to have something like precision, then it's logical to have those axioms. Those properties should hold for such a measure. And basically, they showed there was no measure that fulfilled all of them. And actually, the entropy measured by Martijn is the first one that actually covered all of them. Still, the question is it a good measure? We don't know, actually. But at least it covered all of them. Similar studies have been done on the alignment and precision and recall the F score, the harmonic mean between fitness and precision. And they showed, well, actually, those two are somehow related. So if you have a low fitness, then probably you have a high precision and vice versa. And for example, the IOP minor is designed so that it has a fitness of 1. Its design is such that the fitness is always 1. So if you start comparing the F score between two algorithms, basically you're only comparing precision because the IOP minor always gives a fitness of 1. So what are you comparing? So this is the type of problems that we had with all our metrics. So these are problems of validity. How valid are our constructs and our measures? So talking about this is what we call scientific inquiry. Just the science of what is science. And then I have to discuss what is reliability, what is validity. So first, an idea on how is this currently being done in process discovery, process mining. Basically, you have a paper, and the paper starts with a claim, and the claim then becomes, via an experiment, an insight. And that's the whole idea. And we get a new paper, so we have another insight, and a new paper, another insight. And well, now I have read those 3 papers. I want to apply it myself. And how do you know that it works? How do you know that you can apply it for your own setting? So we have this new context, and the only thing we actually can do at the moment in our field is do another experiment, get new insights. But we have to do it via an experiment. We can't just use it. And the problem, one of the problems is that this insight is individual for the paper, for the setting. So you can only read and rely on that insight inside that paper. So actually, this is not an insight, it's an individual insight. It's a particular insight for that paper. If we do scientific research, what does it mean to do science? And that's where we actually want to, I think that we should move as a field. You have all those experiments with insights, and then basically you get a global insight, and from that you infer whether it will work on your system. And so the basic idea is that you just want to say, well, I've seen all those papers, and that's why I think it's this way. That's how it's, for example, done in social sciences. you replicate a few studies, and based on those replications, you infer, for example, that most people do natural decision making. And that is kind of a global insight made because of all the local and papers that you have. So talking about global insights is only possible if we talk about reliability and validity of our insights. And basically, I just shown you that we have problems with validity. And I've hinted on showing all these different models. What is reliability actually in our field? No? So that is, I think, the main challenge now for process discovery. To start talking about when are our results valid and reliable, and how can we address this? To give you some ideas, because talking to computer scientists, I noticed that the idea of reliability and validity is limited. So typically I try to explain it with those four, what's that actually in English? The dartboards. Yeah? Unreliable, not valid. It just means I throw and it comes somewhere on the board, but it doesn't hit all parts, so it's not really valid. And it's also really reliable because there's a high spread. And so to become reliable, every time when you throw, it should be very close to each other. And so it's kind of a stability. And so reliability is some kind of a stability of the results. They're all in the same sector. And with validity, you want to ensure that you hit everything. And so you always want to hit the middle, the center, and as close as possible. This is what it means if it's reliable and valid. So reliability is about the stability of a measure. And validity is the degree of error freedom. So the fewer errors there are, the better your validity is. And these are the two things we need to discuss. So if we start talking about reliability, then there are lots and lots of different ways of looking into it. Again, reliability, the degree to which a measure is stable. We can split this in repeatability and replicability. Repeatability is just same setup, do you get the same results? And this is trivially true for process mining, process discovery. You just run the algorithm again, and you get the same results. And if it's a non-deterministic algorithm, then with and bounds, you need to define the statistics of when is it the same. But repeatability is not a problem for our field. It becomes trickier if we talk about replicability. And then there's the whole discussion on what is replicability, and well, we want to stay out of repeatability and all those terms. There are many terms at the moment. So we just talk about direct replicability, means other researchers do the same setup, do they get the same results? And so basically, translated, if I run the same experiment on my computer, do I get the same results? That's also most of the time quite okay. The only problem becomes in explicating this. So if you read many of the papers, then can you replicate it from the description? Are all parameters present? What's the tweaking? Often these types of things are not discussed. So it's just said, we run the system and we got these results. And if you're lucky, you can download everything and then press a button and then you run it as well. But the settings are typically not being described in the paper. So we're not really explicating our research. And conceptual replicability is what some of the reviewers, or one of the reviewers actually called the holy grail of process discovery. You have some maybe other researchers that's not really necessary, but if you take an other setup, do you get similar results? And the other setup can be, if I use a different mining algorithm, do I get a similar model? Or if I use a different event log, do I get similar types of results? And so for example, with soundness, so if I put in a new model, do I get a sound model? And that part we can prove. But how well it describes the context, we don't know. And so in a way, conceptual replicability is what some people call the holy grail of process discovery. And I think it's achievable in some settings, but at least we should achieve it. So similarly for validity, validity is the degree to which results are free from errors. So that means we have conclusion validity, concept validity, internal validity, and external validity. And there are many more validities, but at least these are the 4 basic ones. And conclusion validity just says, can I draw the conclusions that I drew? Did I think of everything? Is my setup such that I may draw those conclusions? Actually, this is one of the most simple ones to achieve. If your setup is okay, and can you indeed conclude this? Concept validity is a bit more difficult. It's are we assessing the intended properties? And so the whole discussions on what is simplicity actually? What's precision actually? Recall, what happens? That's concept validity. So are we using the right ones? What does it mean to use those constructs? Are the constructs indeed approximating the concepts that we have, the ideas that we have? And of course, soundness and completeness from computing sciences are 2 of those aspects. And so you want your measure at least to be sound and complete. Your algorithm should be sound and complete. Simple things from computer science. But it's more also on what are the measures, how do the measures work? And that also brings us to internal validity. Can the observed effects be attributed to the treatment? So is the result that we see indeed based on the effect that we changed or not? Yeah, so those are the important ones. And the most difficult one is external validity. So do the causalities also hold in other settings? And so typically a paper that said they did an event log and they discovered a model and they showed that, for example, they showed it worked on the BPI challenge. Can we then conclude that it will also work on another setting? So I have my other event log. Can I apply it? Why can I apply it? Why can I not apply it? That's external validity. And that's where we all run over when we write papers. We write sentences like, we believe it will work. Yeah, but why do you believe it? What's the actual thing behind it that you believe it? And so if you start thinking it from this scenario, then you start to notice that we as a field need to move forward. What is a construct so that we can measure or say something about external validity? Or how can we be sure that it is about the right elements in it? And so a beautiful example for internal validity is sampling. There are some papers on sampling. I won't mention names. But their paper, they conclude, they do sampling on an event log, and they say, look, we get similar results. So we can leave out 70% of the log, and we still get similar results. Yes, but what they forgot to mention is that that event log was very structured. So the system was very structured, meaning that there was less variation in the event log. And hence, if you sampled, most of the sequences were still there. Most of the behavioral profile was still there because it was a highly regular process. You can't conclude it from a very irregular system. And so actually, it was not about the sampling that sampling works. There was a third hidden one that he never discussed, and it's about the regularity of the process. Nobody talks about this. It was not even mentioned in those papers. How do you address this? How do you start thinking about such properties? In order to do so, we need scientific methods. We need some methodology. And so, meta research. What are our methods? How do we report about our methods? What does it mean to be reproducible? What do we actually write down if we do evaluations? What do we actually do if we do an evaluation? And in order to do so, we need to start talking in a common vocabulary, and we need to have some kind of a common process on how to do this. So that's basically my story. We need to move there. Well, here's a methodology. It comes from algorithm engineering. And well, basically we just say, have we applied it on process discovery? So algorithm engineering was since 2009. It's used not too much, but it tries to link theoretical software theory with empirical software engineering. And basically what they say is you need to design your algorithm. So it needs to solve something in the real world, and you prove that it solves. You analyze your program, for example, for runtime analysis, performance, memory consumption, the typical X-space, that's analysis. You implement your stuff, and then you do experiments based on applications so that you get new ideas, new insights that you use to either design a new algorithm or to improve your existing algorithm. And it all comes from some kind of what we call a realistic context. Applying this to process discovery is, in a way, very simple. For example, what is a realistic context? Well, one of the ones is logs with infrequent behavior, whether that's noise or something else. It's a realistic context, so it's a problem stemming from a real application. We can design change the algorithm for it. We can analyze the algorithm, then we implement it. We test it on, say, the BPI challenge log. We get some results, and we say it works or not, and we change the algorithm. So in a way, you could say, well, nothing new here. This methodology, yeah, it's now a nice picture. It's a methodology, but how does this work? So if I just apply this on process discovery, then I would say we're very good at designing the algorithms, lots of proofs. I'm always happy at the PatternNet conference when I see a new algorithm with proofs. Then there's some type of analysis next to it. I'm also very happy if I see the process mining conference or the BPM conference where they have an implementation and some kind of case study. So we're implementing a lot. There's a lot available. It's almost all open source, or at least available. So this part, we're very good at. That's not a problem at all. We have publicly available event logs. So we have real event logs that we can use. But how do we use it? What is the problem that we use? We don't know anything, or we don't know anything about the logs. We just have a log. We have no clue about the system that generated it. It would be great to have some kind of a gold model that just says, well, this is the event log, or this is the model that we use. But there is none. And what is the consequence of not having this gold model, or a gold model? So if you talk about this, then somehow you want to have this ground truth. That means we know that this is the real model. Suppose this is the real model. I do some analysis and I find the model. So here I have the first one. I can compare it, how well I am compared to the ground truth. That says something about how good am I with respect to an external source, which we of course often don't have. But having it allows us to say something about the validity of our result. And if I get a second one, I can compare it to the ground truth. And if I have the right measures, I can start comparing those models with respect to the ground truth and start making a comparison saying, well, if this is ground truth, see, this model is getting closer to it than this one. That's a statement about validity. Then you can start making those issues. But the problem is, typically this is only possible in lab settings, in a controlled experiment. And so there you have the model, you generate event logs, and you do the analysis, and you get a new model, and you can compare the models. And that's a setting where we have this. In field settings, this is hardly possible. It's partly due to the problem of process discovery in real field, because nobody really knows how it looks like. But the problem is more that we measure those validity in terms of quality dimensions, of which we do not agree what the status is. So for the paper, we analyzed 4 different papers. There was no measure that was common between those 4 papers. So one was with alignment, and the other one was with replay, and one was with entropy, and the fourth one I even forgot what it was, but there was no common comparison. So how can you compare the results of those papers? Well, if you have something like a ground truth with good measures, then you can start doing it. So actually, we don't have gold models, so we don't really know what happens. So we have a problem here in the real event logs. And now I want to dig into this experimentation. And this is where the glitters paper comes in. So discussing all this in our papers, what happens? What could possibly go wrong? I already showed you some hints, so there are some hints to show what can go wrong. But the Glitters paper, so Pax 2021, basically just had the idea. Suppose we have some event logs, and we want to discover those models. Basically, let's just take an event log and we sample. And so we have one big event log and we just sample. And we measure for each of the samples how well the samples behaves to this event log. Well, the event log is of course an approximation of something that we call the true process. That's typically hidden. Some people call this the system. I like to call it the true process because we don't know anything about it. And with the system, we implement it so we know something about it. The true process, we just don't know anything about it. But it generated the event log. So there is some kind of relation between the event log and the model or the true process. So suppose we could measure this true process with respect to the event log. So that is the real standard. Those are the actual values, the real values, PT. Those are the real ones for the event log. Of course, we don't know them, but let's suppose we know them. Then we want to compare for each sample, what are those values? And if we can measure how well each sample does here, so we have some kind of an error measure to state how well each sample is, then we can draw some kind of conclusion and say something about what do we want for the sample quality. And basically in the Glitters paper, what we say is we have a first hypothesis. So if this error gets smaller, meaning that the event log is approaching what is in the event log, then I also want that my quality attributes of the sample model approaches this value. So the better the quality of my sample, the closer this value gets to that one. And that's what we want. Because we want to approximate how well we are. And the second hypothesis that we would like to have is, suppose we have two samples, and sample 1 is better than sample 2, then results of sample 1 should be better than sample 2. And then the results of sample 2. And those are basically just two simple hypotheses. Well, and if you have two hypotheses, we can start testing them. So how do you test something like this? That's what we proposed in the Glitters paper. So we have two experiments. The first experiment is we just generate the model M. We generate a log from the model. So we can determine the quality measures. Because we have the model. We know the log it comes from. So we can calculate those. Then we do an experiment. We sample that event log. And so we draw lots of samples. We calculate the error measure. We discover the model. And we determine the quality of the result from the sample. And then we can measure and compare those two. So basically we can test both hypotheses in this setting because we know everything in this setting. And fun thing, we did this on the inductive miner, which is the most used algorithm. For precision, this works. For precision, we had indeed that we could say hypothesis 1 is true. For recall, it did not work. For recall, there was just no correlation at all. But at least we have a result. Precision follows the first hypothesis. Second hypothesis was unfortunately not true. There is no correlation between the sample quality and the experiment. So the inductive miner is nice, but it doesn't satisfy the second hypothesis. So that was the first finding of that paper. Second finding was we did a second experiment, and then we just said, well, let's just take an event log from a benchmark. Let's take one of the BPI challenge logs. So basically we have this setting. And we have a log, we generate some models, or we draw some samples, we discover the models, and we look at this one, and then basically we only look to the second hypothesis. And so we only look into if sample S1 has a better quality than sample 2, then the quality of sample of the resulting model is higher than the quality of the second sample. And I can show you some graphs. Here are some graphs. This is precision, and here's the coverage. So in this one, the error measure is actually the other way around. So if it's 1, it's a perfect cover. So all behavior in the event log is also seen in the sample. And basically what we see is with recall, it goes down. Yeah. So the more we cover, the less the recall becomes. I would have expected something else, actually. And here for the sepsis log, another type of log which is way more irregular, coverage goes up. Recall remains rather stable. So it doesn't really matter how big you sample. Recall is always the same. And here we use the entropy precision and recall of Artem's tool, Artem and Anna's tool. So there's a negative correlation between recall and sampling quality. So it's not that if the log gets better, the model gets better. What's happening here? And partly you can start explaining by, if my coverage is lower, what does it mean? It means that I haven't seen everything. So that means that my model is somehow approximating more. And because it's approximating more, it's assuming things, and that has consequences for recall and precision. So that means there's some kind of hidden third variable that we don't know of. So we can't explain the results just based on the error measure, on the quality. So you could say, if you look to those, what does it mean that we falsified the hypothesis? Does it mean that we need to improve the algorithm? Or does it mean that we have to look into algorithm-specific quality measures? Or try to explain, if I have an event log, that there's some kind of number coming out, and based on that number, I know how well the result will be. Up to now, there is no research on such questions. Everything that we do in process mining is just on a single event log and a single model, and they're related to each other. Yeah? So if I translate these results, the implications of this glitter paper is basically, if we take this event log, we sample it, and based on the samples we start doing some experiments, then we can say, well, those are quite comparable based on behavior, but the results are incomparable. Yeah, so that means we have a problem with unreliability in our results. We don't know anything about reliability. So next question then is, if I get a new event log, how reliable will this result be? What causal inference can I draw from this picture? So basically the implication of our glitters paper is that we cannot draw this. We cannot draw such conclusions. And in a way, I think if you talk to many of the discovery scientists, they somehow know this, but then they typically hide like, yeah, I'm an engineer and I like to build new algorithms. But if you want to move forward as a field and you get all these companies that start using it, but you have no clue about these type of problems, then where are we as a field? What does it mean as a field that we cannot draw any conclusions on whether it works or not? It's like I'm a consultant and I will give you some result and it's just my subjective interpretation. Yeah, why? And can you explain us? And that's the next step I think we have to move into our field of process discovery. So the conclusion actually of the glitters paper is that we don't have a clue about what we do in experimentation. And that's for me very worrying. So discussing all this is what we call meta research. And it's about these type of research. How do we do this? And a first step is this common vocabulary. And the methodology I already showed you. And we already follow this. Don't make it explicit, we follow it. In any paper, section 1, some claim. Section 2, preliminaries up to section 3 or 4 to design the algorithm and do some analysis. Section 5 says we implemented in from Boopar, PM for PAR, you name it. And look, we did some evaluation. So any paper follows this structure already. We don't make it explicit, but we already follow it. So just telling that this is what you need to do is not sufficient. So we need to have some kind of wording and a vocabulary. And getting a common vocabulary is very difficult. We were only with 4 people, and it took us 14 trials to get the actual resulting model. So this is actually the model that we are now submitted in the paper. Still are all kinds of discussions. And so, for example, if you read a paper, and one of the papers said, we are robust against noise. What does it mean to be robust? They never explicated that in their paper. They actually made some kind of, a first claim was this robustness. Then they started to work on an algorithm. They didn't have any hypothesis. And actually in the experiment, they showed something else than robustness. Yeah? So basically what we want to need, or what we need is, if we make a claim, what do we actually mean if we talk about noise? And then we need to talk about what is the concept of noise. So what's your idea of noise? And how do you represent it? So basically this is the idea that you have about it. And this is your mathematical implementation of it. So for example, if you talk about alignment precision or entropy precisions, those are constructs of something that we call precision. And here you need to add those elements. And then none of the papers we studied make hypotheses. Yeah, so they all make claims, they directly move to the experiment, but they never explicate what is the hypothesis that we are testing. So how do you know what is the claim of the paper, or how valid is the claim of the paper if you don't make the hypothesis explicit? And there are many of those things. It looks simple, this vocabulary, but if you actually start moving around each of those boxes and start asking, but what does it mean? You get into problems and difficulties, and then you need to start to explicate what you mean. So to guide the researcher in doing this, we developed, or we are developing a kind of a checklist that basically goes through each box and each relation between 2 boxes, and just ask, how about? So, did you explicate? What is your concept? How does the concept approximate it? Do you actually measure the right thing? So simple questions, really simple questions. The answers are difficult. So basically we just want this checklist to help the researcher in making a better research. I think it's a necessary step. It's not sufficient. You could just easily tick all the boxes and say, yes, 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 I did so. But really thinking about those helps you in getting a better research or getting in better results. So that's what we're currently working on. And if we do this well, what does it mean to do it well? It means that we have to start translating statistics, or the field of statistics, to process mining and process discovery. How do you compare this? We need methods to evaluate our algorithms. And so we do lots of comparisons, benchmarks, but everybody does it on their own way. And there I think we need to move towards standardized procedures so that we can really say something. But then you also need common shared metrics. And the study of metrics and what are the real metrics has not been done since the quality dimensions. So since 2012, actually we always use the same 4. And we still have discussions what are the right ones. And somebody comes up with a new one, and again, and again, and again. But it's never from a picture of what do we actually want to measure and why do we want to measure it. And I can't solve it alone. So my message to you is, please help us in spreading this message that we need to move to normal science, as Koen would say it. So that's it. If we understand better what we're doing, we might be able to do it better. This is the quote for research methodology, and I hope that we can this way keep on working on process discovery, because it's way too fun to do all these theoretical stuff and formal stuff, but only if you can apply it in practice and know the implication of why it works. So thanks a lot. That's it.
Thank you, Martijn. Thank you. It was a very interesting insight in our field, I would say. Any questions from the audience? Maybe let's start from the audience. Also online, if you're online and have a question, maybe unmute. We should hear you.
I'm happy to start with the question. Thanks for the talk. It's very making it a science. It's really important for people to appreciate that. So I've got few questions about the slide where you show the recall dropping, like the burst. So. Oh, this one actually, yeah, this is another one before this time. So, how do you test recall here? So, if you've got a set of samples that you use to discover the process, are you taking from outside or?
No, so what we did is we took the actual log and we just draw samples of it. So for each, in this case, we did simple random sampling. So for each trace, we just decided with a 10% chance, will it be at or X% chance, will it be in or out? And that's the only sampling we did. And then we calculated for that sample, we calculated what would be the result and then compared it with the actual results.
Well, we measured the error, right?
Yeah.
Error of that sample with respect to the original.
Yeah.
Log.
And error is result of behavioral quality. So
On coverage basically is the error measure.
Yeah.
On coverage means no error, full log. Right? I mean,
no, you're
so like that error in the sample, the call is lower.
so the better the sample approximates the event log, the worse the results get. And that was with the entropy measures. So at least those fulfilled all or ticked all the boxes that we know at this moment.
At this stage, we agree that these are good properties.
Exactly.
Maybe they will change.
Yeah.
But I mean, I found your message, kind of general message, a bit scary, right? There were 20. I never did. Well, I was involved in process discovery between split minor, but let's say not the original paper, but in the economic extension. I didn't do too much of process discovery in my research. But we have 25 years of process discovery, right? From the year 2000 it started. And kind of the field is now tired. So we're kind of saying, well, we rarely work on new discovery algorithm. It's now down the trend. And you kind of invite, well, we need to do another iteration. We now need to enter this scientific round where we can really compare them.
Yeah.
And I see it's very challenging to actually push the community toward this.
So in a way, we now solved, or well, solved is a big word, but the low-hanging fruit has now been picked. Sometimes you still see a new algorithm popping up. That's nice. We developed a new algorithm, for example, with identifiers, and there's still fun stuff to do and things to discover. But the next step is basically saying, what is this event log? What is it representing? And so each event log is somehow a sample of an unknown population. So we need to start to apply statistics in order to say something about the results we get. So the theoretical computer science is still fun, but it's getting more difficult because, well, yeah, all simple things have been done. But as a field, we now need to make the next step and making it a science. And making it this empirical science, saying these are results if you apply it in practice. And so if you design an algorithm, you just say, well, if, for example, the binary search only works if your array is sorted. That's a check you can do on the array. What's that check that we need to do in order to say our process algorithm or process discovery algorithm is applicable on this event log? That's the question we don't know. And I'm inviting to start answering that question. What are those properties in order that we know that we can apply it?
Okay, in which circumstances your algorithm brings some guarantees?
Yes. So basically, we need to start to study the preconditions in terms of Dijkstra. I'm from Eindhoven, so I'm still from the formal school. In terms of, we need to know our preconditions so that we know something about our postcondition.
But this questionnaire you showed, it's very small. I'm not quite sure what is it, right? These are the questions that a researcher who proposes a new discovery algorithm should kind of consider. Or is it some kind of a questionnaire which is more or less mechanical, I mean, I was in a discovery algorithm. I basically can answer this question mechanically, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then once I'm done, I fall into category with whom I'm competing and how I should be evaluating.
Yeah.
Now I know that if I want to test robustness, this is how I should do it. So competitors.
Yeah. So to give an example, the inductive miner says, given that the event log stems from a block structured system, the system can be represented by a block structured model. If my event log is complete, only then I will return the original model.
And 2 or 3 other requirements.
But all these requirements are on this event log.
Yeah.
And in that context, we prove that it works. What we did not show is whether our assumptions are valid for an event log. So how do you know that this event log is indeed stemming from a block structured system so that you can apply it? And that's the step we need to start working on. So if we have our context of the algorithm, are our assumptions valid? Or how do we test our assumptions on the event log?
They're discussing about the limits of the models, so for example, the expressivity or things about convergence. So in the limits, if you've got full logs, you'll be able to recover the full model.
Yes, those discussions are there. So for some algorithms, it's proven in a way that if the event log is satisfying these conditions, then you will find the original model. The implications of to what extent a system conforms to a model is a completely different story. I wouldn't, then you're more in the theoretical computing sciences proving that your system actually adheres to your model. And then you're in, for example, Kim Larson's equivalence relations. Those type of things. So, but that's a distinct discussion. System model representation is something that's incredibly difficult because of our abstraction. So whether the system adheres to the model or the model adheres to the system, we don't know. But within the context of process mining, at least where we assume it comes from the system can be fully represented by this model, then we have all kinds of properties given the event log. And one does it better than the other. Or makes different choices actually.
But also, I also often find that if an algorithm comes with some guarantees and under certain assumptions, let's say if a log approaches infinity and it's larger and larger than you can discover a system, well, yeah, you get the property, you can rediscover a system, but the result is then practically useless because you're getting more like you showed the spaghetti models of a blob of things, right? Because if there is a formal property, you discover that thing, but practically it's useless.
So one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves as well is level of abstraction. So my event log is a set of traces. And the basic comparisons that we do is on trace equivalence level. But with models and systems, we are talking about bisimulation or all the interval relations, all these equivalence classes that we have. And with process mining, at the moment, we're still only on trace equivalence level. We don't know how to move up in that stack. We have no clue on how to do this. And because I can give you 10 models that all have the same set of traces. Which of those 10 different models do you show? That's the level of abstraction we don't know. We don't have measures for this. And that's the other intriguing question. So there are still many, many interesting questions, but we need to start to address it.
I mean, if you have two models, do you have a method to measure how different these two models are, like a metric to measure distance between the two models, two process models?
Yes and no. For isomorphism, it's quite easy because then you have, for example, something like a graph edit distance. If you talk on the level of bisimulation, it becomes trickier because then you get relations of states and how many are missing and how many are added. That's a completely different story. There we don't know. So, interesting question for research.
But I must say, I listened to a talk and that remind me of the glitters paper, like I would call it glitters paper. But I mean, I see value in this type of kind of, you know, experimental frameworks that are proposed, which can reveal the quality of the algorithm in the whole thing.
Yep.
So, so we propose two, I believe, in that paper. I think there can be further value in proposing more of such experimental setup, lab experiments, controlled experiments, or you know, that can reveal the properties of algorithms. So we are sure that the better input leads to a better output.
Yeah.
Whatever quality measures are used to instantiate that framework.
Yeah, so in the paper we address 4. So one is it's designed and proven correct. Second is it's feasible. Look, I applied it once.
Yeah, 4 levels of quality, right?
Third level is we did controlled experiments and look, our hypothesis holds. And the fourth is look, we used it in the wild and it still works. So those are the 4 stages, and I think those 4 are already quite mature. But none of the algorithms match at the moment level 4. So maturity level 4 is not met by any of our algorithms. But
and
also
we papers and proposed algorithms that don't discuss them.
Exactly. So intriguing questions, and I hope I inspired you to do lots of more research. Any questions from the online people?
Maybe they can also, if you are shy to unmute yourself, you can also type in the chat window. So if you talk to industry, they tell you discovery is solved. Yep. If you talk to academics, they say there's still a lot to be done.
Yeah. No, if you talk to academics, we say we just started. And I think these are the valuable questions that also, for example, companies like Apromore should start working on. Apromore, Salonis, all these companies should start looking in this.
They will tell you discovery is done.
It's pity, but Wednesday I will talk to Marcello. So
very good. Questions from the audience?
Final chance.
All right, so if you want to still meet Jan Martijn, he is here. He's on level 4. If you walk around level 4 in open space, you will see him.
Just not on my shoulder.
Yeah, otherwise approach me and I will show you the way. Find me also on level 4 in one of the offices. Approach me and I'll show you the way to Jan Martijn.
And if I'm not here anymore, then send me.
That's right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yep.
Jan Martijn.